let Paul Turcotte talk.
Hold on, I got my picture.
Oh, there. Oh, you've got a picture. I'm sorry. There you go.
So this is just kind of going in. We're going to go into these end of semester reports, and
yes.
just had this we just made this picture up a couple of years ago, just to show the interrelationship between the 4 end of semester reports. Basically everything hits against the S. The different things there are what checks between them. Those are the key fields that it's looking for when it does look between them, and it just makes it just makes it a little more understandable as to how all these interrelate.
No, I think that's very helpful. And we're going to start with the CBM008 end of semester report. And we're very pleased that Paul Turcotte has joined us. He is the person in the agency who uses this report more than any other. He has to generate several reports from the data that you provide to us. And I know we've had lots of requests for training on the 8. So we're going to hand it over to Paul and let him explain to you how the 008 works, at least from his perspective.
Thanks, Julie, and thank you all for coming in today and talking about this. Just a quick poll: how many people find the CBM008 confusing? Raise your hand. Less people than I thought. That's good. That's encouraging. How many people are tired of getting emails from me after you clear your edit report saying something doesn't look right? No? That's good. We're close to getting the fall 2014 CBM004 CBM008 reports done and in, so that's good. Maybe advance the slide. Oh, right, control and everything. Okay, so what are we doing with the CBM008? This faculty salary report is where we collect the information for each faculty member. The key ID on the report is not the faculty member, but it's the faculty member and the course they've taught. So it reflects employees of the institution who are paid a salary or receive benefits associated with the institution and who have any type of faculty appointment regardless of the source of funds of their assignment during the year. Faculty demographic data is collected. Salary and appointment percentages are collected. This is a semester report, and this data is used in the accountability system and any HRI reports where the faculty information is required. I'm going to hit the wrong button here, I know it. I did well. So the question you always have to ask yourself is, how are we using the data that you're providing us? It is good to know that we are actually using it, because I realize it's a lot of work getting it to us. One of the things we use it for is the average budgeted faculty salaries, and this probably raises the most questions, so that's why I put it first. We're doing some things with the data that you give us that makes it a little bit difficult once we put that report out there for you to say, hey, this doesn't look exactly like the number that I gave them. And the first reason why is we take your fall number and we double it so that it represents a full year salary. That in itself causes problems if the fall and the spring semester for a particular faculty member aren't identical. And that does occasionally happen, but I think for the most case, it isn't the case. They're fairly even semesters. So doubling it fairly well represents a full year salary. Then we convert that to an FTE. And this is the part that I get a lot of questions about. We take that percent of time value that you give us, and we use that as the denominator for the salary. And what it does is it takes, say, a half-time employee and doubles that salary again. So now you may have given me a $10,000 salary. It's now $40,000 for that person because they were half-time, and that can lose a lot of folks, and it can cause some interesting numbers. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. The last thing we do is we average that by the university or the college. These results are posted both on our faculty salary website. I don't know if you've seen that. We have a page just for that with all of the reports, and it's also included in the accountability system. The next thing we use it for, which is probably more important because it relates to money, the general academic institutions use it for their expenditure study. They use it as a cost driver for faculty salaries in itself. And so the weights that are used in the general academic instruction and operation formula, they're based partially on the numbers that you're reporting to us for faculty salaries on the faculty salary report. Last thing, again, we use it in the accountability system. for a variety of things which I've listed there, but I won't go through. Okay, so these emails that I send out, some common issues, really they're grouped into two common issues. One is duplicate faculty. Several key fields on the faculty salary report have to be identical. Again, what I told you before we introduced the S, faculty members were reported one time on the faculty salary report. That was the key ID was their ID. That's not the case anymore now. We duplicate the faculty member for every course they teach. So an instructor teaching 3 courses would be listed on the fall faculty salary report 3 times. When we do our reports, we actually aggregate that together or deduplicate it. And so fields are items number 1 through 23, except for the flex entry items 15 through 17. Those have to be identical. If they're not, what happens is one faculty member might look like 3. And that's going to throw off our faculty counts and our full-time equivalent summaries. All right. And so the next thing that falls into case is we have a disproportionate change in the percent of time or compared to the salary. This happens a lot when faculty members maybe change from full-time to part-time, part-time to full-time, or some other various things that will occur. Maybe they get promoted and they get a larger salary, but it doesn't change their rank on this report. Or pick up additional duties which fall into the scope of this report and yet they don't change rank. That can create some questions. Oftentimes, though, what it is the percent of time or the salary have an error in them. And so we don't really pick on every faculty member when we're looking at this. We really look at it in the aggregate, and when we see something wild in the aggregate number in that institution average by rank, then we'll call you up and say, hey, something doesn't look right. But before I do that, I'll generally go into the data and see if you've got any faculty members that have 1,000% change in their average FTE salaries. And so I'll send those back to you saying, hey, you might want to look at these and see if that's a reality. Any questions on that particular common issue? All right. Well, it's good to hear. I think I have to give up the trigger then.
Rose Burrows, St. Philip's College, San Antonio. I do have a question on the calculation of the average of the faculty salary. Did you state that that was calculated in fall and spring? And does that include overloads or just the base salary?
Okay, so for the average budgeted salary, we only use the fall report for that. We don't use the spring or the summer. And the overload salary is not included in that number that we're using for the report.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, another question? Yeah.
We've kind of been going around and around on who to include on the report. So it says anybody with a faculty appointment, I think, or a title. Would that include administrators, like the president who has a faculty appointment? And if so, do we put them down with their entire salary with the 0%, or a zero salary with 100%, or don't put them on at all? If we put them on, will the very count influence the number of faculty that's showing on your faculty reports? Just talk about that a little bit.
You bet. That's a good question. We get this quite often. The answer to all 3 questions is yes. You do want to include them if they have an instruction component. It definitely you definitely want to include what they're actually being paid, and it absolutely skews the average. There's no way around it. It's we're mimicking something that is done by a number of national organizations for this particular metric, And so we want to stay consistent with that. They include those, and so we also include them in ours. It's almost always when I'm wrong and you're right on these weird percentages, it's almost always a president or a high-level faculty or high-level administrator teaching a course. One course for a very small percentage of their time. No, you don't put them on if they don't have an instruction component.
Okay. Oh, another question on the 8. No, that's fine. That's what we're here for.
So I have a question in reference to the SPAN FE for spring. When spring SPAN FE is completed, we can't count it the regular spring term. When do we count those courses on the 8? Are we counting them in the summer?
So these are going to be your flex entry courses that
Correct.
start at the beginning of a semester, but then they span into a later semester, Paul.
Right.
And I don't know how that works on the 8.
I believe they're supposed to match what you're doing with the S report.
Right,
if
so
you're-
they would be reported in the later semester. Correct? Everyone's nodding. And the later semester, so the semester where you're reporting them as flex on the S, and also they would be coming in on the 1 in a later semester, right? So if it's let's do an example. So a course starts in the beginning before the census date. It starts in fall. Say a course started in fall 14, and it completes in April of 15. So when you are reporting that course for that faculty member, it's going to be a span. It's going to come in on the S in spring of 15, right? Because that's when the course concluded. That's when you knew the full information. Is that correct? And then that is when and also on the other end of semester reports, because the course is finished and you can let us know. And in terms of when the course started, we can, and what I will recommend, because we're going to talk about flex, is that we have a flex entry table in Appendix P, which it shows for those spanned flex entries how to think about them. And this is not just for the 8, but overall, sort of when to report on the different reports. I don't know if we've included the 8 on that. I'll look, because I think we could include the 8 on those examples. And I'll go ahead, and I think, Doug, you've got a copy of the manual. Can you, if you've got Appendix P, we'll take a look.
Sure.
And I think that would be helpful. Yes, and we have a question here.
The problem is we don't have a CBM 8 in summer.
Okay.
So the SPAN FE from spring term
Okay.
that ends in summer,
Right.
there's no 8 to put it on. And the appendix
That's
that
what the
you're
question
talking-
is. Thank you. I'm glad we got to what that's all about. So you don't have yep, that's very good. So we have to figure out instructions for you when something is spanning into the summer because you don't have an 8. So thank you. We'll take that back and we'll provide you with instruction, and we can add an example to our flex entry table that takes into account the 008. Yes, another question.
Okay, I'm sorry, but in other words, what I just heard you say, I think, is nobody who doesn't teach a course should appear on the 8?
I think that's correct. I don't think we put non-teaching.
Okay.
I'll always defer to Lincoln Holmes.
Yeah. So you're talking about someone who is being paid as a faculty member, but they are not teaching a course in that given semester, but they are paid as a faculty member, and they are included, and everyone's nodding. Those faculty members are included on the CBM008. So this might be someone who's doing research. Yes, we have a.
So people who typically they will have a rank, faculty rank.
Right. This is not the president who is not teaching.
Well, it could be.
The president would be reported. If the president is someone who's teaching a course, the president would be reported. But generally, it's probably not. The president is not going to be included as someone who's going to be a faculty member. Even if they have a faculty rank, they're not going to be.
Okay. So if they have a faculty rank, but they're only administrator duties, current
Right.
assignment.
And I'm gonna
deans, directors, or whatever
Okay.
kinds of things. But
And-
they're not teaching. They will not be on the report at all.
That's always been my understanding, that those folks aren't on the report. But Doug, we're going to let Doug Parker pick it up from here, because I am not an expert on the 8. Yes.
I can read it for you.
Okay, Doug's going to read it to you, how we characterize it.
We've read that a few times.
Collect data for any on the academic duties and services of each person who has any type of faculty appointment, regardless of their source of funds or assignment. Include research faculty, librarians, administrators, if they have faculty titles, and faculty who may be on paid leave.
Okay, so it would include administrators with faculty titles. Thank you. And I think, Paul, you probably don't use that data because we're not getting...
It's a little deeper than I have to dive.
No, you don't have to dive that deep because you're just looking at those who are teaching for the reports that you have to produce. So we apologize for the confusion on that. Okay, yes.
If you have a faculty that you're reporting that is not tied to a course, how is that reported on the report, and how does that not error out?
You won't get an error if there's not a course associated with it. I do know that I see entries with no courses.
Yeah, so just don't associate any course with that faculty member you're reporting. Yes?
Is it possible that the university reporting is different than the CTC?
Yes, the question was, is it possible that the structure of the CBM008 report is different for universities and community colleges? The answer is yes. We have a different set of slides for that.
Yeah, so we're going to go into the 8 for community colleges in a few minutes. So why don't we...
Does that cause some relief?
Oh, you were getting a little nervous there. Those from community colleges. Yeah, no, there are, and I think you see on the agenda that the 8 shows up twice, and we wanted to cover the 8 first for universities. Now we're going to move. I'm just going to talk about the S once. So we were just talking about the N once, and I might have added to that confusion when we moved to the N and I said we're just going to discuss it once. But we will talk about the 8 for community colleges in a few minutes. I've just moved because I just want to keep you all awake. I know this is riveting, exciting information, and all this new research about sitting is telling me every once in a while I need to stand up. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the CBM00S, and if I do need to move back to get support, I will do that. But I do spend a lot of time working with CBM00S and CBM002 data, so those are the 2 reports that I'll be discussing today. And in terms of time, I will try to keep it as brief as possible so we have room for your questions.
Hey, Julie, are you on the 2 or the S?
I'm on the S showed up on the schedule. That's what I thought I'd start with the 2, and then I saw the S is what's included on the schedule. So if we get the 2 up here, we've got the 2 here. Okay, yeah, we need to jump into the S. Sorry, here I have the S. Okay. First of all, I want to thank all of you for all of the hard work you did several years ago when this report was introduced. We told you at the time it was going to be useful for all kinds of things, for all kinds of data analysis and work that we do at the coordinating board and work that researchers do. And it absolutely, we're starting to see that happen now that we have 4 years or almost 4 years worth of data. The CBM00S report is our student schedule report, and you might want to think about it like a transcript level report. It has information about what courses a student is taking, how the student performed in those courses. So it's kind of, for those of you who knew, a combination. On the 1, we get information about the student. On the 4, we get information about the courses. On the S, we get record level information for the student in the course. So we have a record for every course a student takes. And this has been wonderful information to have in terms of the type of analysis that we want to be able to do as a state, whether it's tracking students from K-12 to higher ed and into workforce, or for just higher ed type analyses of what students are doing in their coursework. So thank you all for your help with that. We did have a grant from the federal government, the state longitudinal data system grant, and I know there were some funds provided to institutions to help with that. It is an end of semester report. I guess I can do this from here. It is an end of semester report, and it does match to the CBM001, and Doug showed you the illustration of the match. One thing I want to say about the S, and when I get to the CBM002, which is the Texas Success Initiative report, it's really important to read the materials in the introduction of the manual. So For every report, there's a little introductory section, and then there are the instructions. Well, those introductions are important, especially for the S and the 2. I think I counted for the 2, we've got about 13 pages of introductory materials. But those things are really important as you're trying to understand these reports. So don't forget that that's part of the process of understanding what to report, is to read those introductory sections. The S, there are some differences in the S across community colleges and universities, and most of these differences have to do with differences we see on the 1, or we'll see on the OE1, and that's reporting for the class part of it, whether it's contact hours or semester credit hours related to funding. So we do have some additional items on the CTCS related to that. The classification options, of course, are different across universities and community colleges. So there are differences, but the items I'm going to focus on today are the ones that are similar, because I think we've already talked through some of the issues with reporting semester credit hours. But what I will say, it is very important that you report semester credit hours to us in the decimal places that we've provided, and that becomes important when we talk about non-course-based option for developmental education. So I am going to start with item 18 on the universities and item 21 on the community technical college. This is an item where institutions need to provide to us the high school credit status for every student. And we have collected information about dual credit student for years, and that's on the CBM001, where we have a field where you tell if the hours a student has earned on the 1, how many hours they earned as a high school student for high school and college credit. So we have that information on the 1. Now we're collecting information on the S about high school credit status. In some cases, from some institutions, it doesn't match up. And we actually did a very deep dive into this in the last couple of weeks when I knew the training was coming. We would expect them to not be exactly the same, because you can have students on the 1 who are starting before the census date, and then you might have some kind of a flex type dual credit program happening where it's starting after this census date and it's going to come to us on the S but not come to us on the 1. So we expect some slight differences between what's reported for students in terms of their contact hours on the 1 and what's reported for students on the S, for students who are identified in this item as dual credit students, what's reported for their hours. But we don't expect huge differences. And we do have some institutions, I've talked to some folks already, but we did have several institutions where we checked this, where there were some really big differences. And we shouldn't be seeing that. If you're telling someone is dual credit on the 1, you need to be reporting them on the S under this item as a high school student. So just wanted to make sure everybody understood that that's important. You know, most of your students are going to be coded 0, not a high school student. But if you have high school students, you need to give us that 1 or 2 code, and it'll be important that aligns. We have more and more dual credit. We're doing lots of research on these students. We want to get the best understanding we can. Now, we have been told by some institutions sometimes it's hard to tell if a high school student is taking a course for dual credit or not for dual credit, and we've always said do the best you can on this one. So those code 1s or code 2, you know, sometimes you'll have a student who you won't realize they're actually doing it for high school credit. They didn't let you know. So do the best you can, but do try to, the most important thing is differentiating those students who are in high school from those who aren't.
Julie?
Yes, question.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. You're comparing the S for, say, the spring term to the CBM1 for spring term?
Yeah, so what we did for this particular exercise is we looked at all the students who were reported to us, and I think we looked at fall, on the 1 with that dual credit high school hours. And we're able to tell from the hours, if we unduplicate, we can tell how many students are reported. And that's typically the data we've used over all the years to report out on dual credit enrollments. But now that we're getting this dual credit information on the S, I thought, well, we need to start using the S more for dual credit, and want to make sure institutions are capturing students on both if they're in fact enrolled for the whole semester. And what we were finding is for some institutions, for some it was an exact, and for many it was a very close match between the number of students being reported as high school students on the 1 and those being reported as high school students on the S. And then, of course, we were able to figure out the hours reported on the S versus on the 1, and there was a very close match. But we did have some institutions where there was a big difference, and unless all of the dual credit is starting as flex or something like that, and we'll dig a little deeper, but it seems to be that there might be some reporting issues there.
My concern is that with our dual credit students, their start and end dates do not mirror our college start and end dates.
Okay.
So they're all span FE, so they get reported in the next term.
And that's exactly what we need to know when we start looking at this data, and we'll get in touch with institutions. That's very helpful to know that this is not a report. It's probably not a reporting error. It's something to do with how the dual credit is structured. And as we try to understand dual credit better, we'll be going in to look at that. So I will contact the institutions that had some issues, and we'll try to get to the bottom of it. But I did want to stress that it is important that you understand we've got items on the 1 and items on the S related to dual credit students. And, if your dual credit is traditional in terms of semesters, they should look pretty much the same to us when they're reported. But thank you. Okay. This is an item on the S about developmental education, the developmental education course intervention level. And this was an item where we had a change just this past fall. And when you look in the manual, you can still see items 2 and 3 and 5 and 6. That's where in the past you reported the DevEd level to us. Well, it's not a level anymore. We are now, and in fact, we probably need to change the title, but now what we are asking institutions to report, now that we have all kinds of new initiatives happening with developmental education, no longer is it pretty much the standard that students take a course and it's either the lowest level, the medium level, either they're in intermediate algebra and they're in introductory algebra and they're they're in some kind of fundamental math. Now we have a lot more variety in terms of the type of developmental education we're seeing. So we have changed this item to better reflect what the current landscape is in terms of developmental education. So now you just need to report to us if it's not developmental education, that's easy, but if it's a developmental course, if it's a developmental ed intervention, those are going to be those NCBOs that are non-traditional. If it's some kind of a self-paced course or intervention, a lot of people are doing this. The Emporium models, there's a whole lot of folks doing that. Some in large malls. Actually, I'm joking, but Austin Community College actually took over a mall that's just down the street here, and it's a math emporium now. And we also are seeing a lot of co-requisite models, and this is happening in a lot of states. And I know the folks who, we're part of a consortium where we report data. It's called Complete College America, and they've said, oh, we're thrilled that you're actually collecting this co-requisite information now because there's a lot of interest in this type of intervention because I think in these types of courses because they've shown a lot of promise. So we are now collecting the data just this way. So moving forward, you need to make sure you understand this item. The one piece, and I know Jana always points out to me that in reporting these items, it should be reverse priority. So you may have something that's a course, but it's a co-requisite course. It should be reported as 8 and not reported as 1 in terms of developmental education. So kind of go backwards in terms of, well, what if what I'm doing falls into 2 different categories? It's got a self-paced component, but it's a co-requisite. The student's doing it with a college math course. That's where just go backwards and use that for priority. The other thing we're asking you to do, and I think I'd like to find out if this has been challenging, is we're asking you, if it is a co-requisite model, to tell us on item 8, if the record that you're reporting is for a student who is in a college level course that is paired with DE. So for example, if you have a student who's in one of these paired courses and you're telling us this record I'm giving you now on the S is for college algebra, but this record for college algebra, so you're going to be reporting the course code for that, all the information for this college algebra course the student has taken, their grade in college algebra, etc. But that college algebra course is part of a pairing with a developmental education course or intervention. We want you not to tell us 0 here, it's not a DevEd course. We want you, if possible, to give us an 8 code. So if we go back to say, okay, what are these pairings? What DevEd courses are being paired with what college courses? This is the way we can do that. This is why we added that. And I have heard feedback from Jana and some other folks who are working with this data that some people have said this can be a challenge, especially if the college level course is half full with students who aren't part of a paired course, and the other half of the students are part of a paired course. So do we have anyone had that experience? Well, let me know if you do, and I'm hopefully now you all understand that item. And it's actually very important. There's a lot of interest in that area. Our first college level course item is where you tell us if a student has successfully completed a first college level course, and this is with an A, B, or C. I didn't include all the information here, but this is another item that's very important, especially for community colleges, because it is tied to success points. And we use this item to help calculate those. And for those of you who aren't aware, there are some voluntary guidelines related to first college level courses that were developed by a task force that came to the coordinating board. Pretty much, I think almost all the institutions in the state were represented. They did a lot of good work. So if your institution is struggling with what courses should fall under that first college level course umbrella, there's guidelines available. And they're in the manual in Appendix Q. Okay. Course grades. This is at the core of the CBM00S, and I cannot tell you how many analyses, especially during this past legislative session, we did using course grades, because there's a lot of interest in how students are performing. Different types of students, tracking students across courses. It's been used several different ways. It's really valuable. Some things that are important to remember are that, for example, option 9, code 9, is for DevEd students only. We have seen some doctoral students working on their dissertations reported with E for effort or in progress. Now, at your institution, you might call someone who's working on well, I know it's a lot of effort because I did it. I would have enjoyed an E for effort. And in progress, I know, can last a long time, and in progress might be the term that you use at your university for doctoral students who are working on their dissertations, but it's not appropriate for a course grade. You would just provide us with an incomplete for that student if it's dissertation hours and they're moving forward. And generally I know they're not graded. So that E for effort in progress is something mostly community colleges use for DevEd. They asked us to include it. We did add an option for if the instructor didn't provide a grade. But the next slide has to do with the point value of the grade, and it's really important with the point value that if you have a student who is taking a course pass-fail, so to go back to the grades, that's going to be the C for example, 8 credit or passed, or no credit did not pass, which is different than an F. That should not be included in the point value, because you don't have a way to assign a point value to a gut credit, like pass out of pass-fail. We don't want you guessing everyone got a B. That just needs to be left off. The grade points that we receive we use them for different purposes. If we calculate some kind of grade point average in part of research, we understand it's not the same one you're going to have. That, you may or may not include courses a student took at a prior institution. You're going to have your own definitions and own protocols for how you do GPA. But for our purposes, we only want a grade point if the course was actually graded. So withdrawals, we shouldn't see anything there, etc. And I think we do have some edit checks built in for that. So back to the grade point value. This is different than we used to do it. It's just very important that you recognize that this is we've got the decimal places built in. So a 3.8 should not go in as a 38. It should go in as a 380. And sometimes we see data, and we do have edit checks in the ranges, and they will kick in sometimes. So I think generally institutions do a good job with that. Now, non-course-based options. This is something that I could do a whole 3-hour presentation on, and I have spent over an hour, doing presentations at TACRO and TARE on non-course-based options. We are happy to help you with this. In terms of recording non-course-based options, and these are developmental education options, it's really important that you get them right in terms of what you're reporting for the semester credit hours, and you have the ability to report them in decimal places. So please do that as appropriate. Also, we have, because you can have a non-course based option that's a quarter of a semester credit hour. You can report that to us as 0.25 if that's in fact what you're doing. That's 4 contact hours long. We had a question come in this week, someone wanted to know what happens with these non-course-based options that just keep going and going and going, was my sense of the question. And, it is very important that for non-course-based option, they are still structured and reported to us. This system is set up to report courses, and I put that in quotes. So we want to make sure we don't have a situation where a student is covering the same material semester after semester after semester and they're not mastering it. We don't want a situation where the institution is funded semester after semester after semester when really it's that the student isn't mastering the material. So when you're working on reporting to us something where it's self-paced, you still have to tell us, you still have to affiliate semester credit hours or contact hours, and it still should be based on the course material that should be covered. So if the student isn't able to cover that course material, then the course should not be reported to us again for funding. But if you're doing something self-paced, it should be designed and structured so that the first part is set up in the first semester. Then the student might move into the second set of material to be covered in the second semester. I know these non-course based options can be really challenging. I don't want to spend too much time, but hopefully that helps a little. Yes?
The student is not a course structure.
Right.
Because that takes a few hours and then I have to set up a course after the fact. I can't really.
Okay, setting up a course after the fact is I think a challenging thing to do, because you should be able to know that you're enrolling a student into a program.
It's kind of a lab setting, though.
Right. And even in a lab setting, what we've talked about, and again, this can be challenging, but you need to think about, okay, am I enrolling the student? For example, you might have some kind of diagnostic information on this student, and you might know this is the material that needs to be covered for this student in the lab setting in the self-paced, and that's about 1 semester credit hours worth of DE material. Say they understand, 2/3 of what is normally covered. I'm going to compare it to a traditional, say, a intermediate algebra DE course. So say you have a diagnostic that says this student really just needs a small piece of that material. So you could think about, all right, a student who just missed 3 or 4 modules, we can enroll them in we'll set up a 1 semester credit hour course and enroll this student in that so that they can do their material. And we've allowed you some flexibility, so maybe they're missing 3 modules, maybe they're missing 5, 3 pieces. Maybe you have a student who's missing almost all of it, and you decide, well, that would be the 3 semester credit hour intervention that we would enroll them in, or the 1.5 semester, So if you can think about it that way, we know we don't want every single student reported in a separate class. That's going to be too hard for everyone, and I don't think people are doing that. But you're doing that, okay. And that's not the way we've thought about and I don't think it's the way you should think about the.
There's plenty of students we've
sense.
had that the course isn't set up beforehand. They're coming into like a lab setting.
Okay.
They're not even getting enough hours for me to report them. They're not on the 4 to 8 semester credit hours crosswalk.
So these are students who have been required to do DE because they didn't meet the TSI standard, but they're just not showing up to do the work. Is that what you're saying? They're not.
They're allowed to go in and out,
Right.
and they keep track of their clock hours, their
Right.
minutes, and they're just not there long enough, or maybe they get out and pass it and they're okay from that point, but they're not there long enough for me to report.
Okay, well, if they're out and they pass it, and this is something that we've talked a lot about with those non-course based option, that if you have a student who is able to cover the material in a condensed amount of time, you still had to think about that in terms of material, that here's the amount of material that we want this student to be able to cover. So maybe they do it in a shorter amount of time than you expected, but they cover the material. Then you can think about putting that student in, here's the section, or whatever you want to call it, the NCBO, that covers this amount of material. And it is challenging because obviously we don't want everyone put in a 3 semester credit hour intervention, and they're all getting through in one day. That doesn't make sense in terms of funding, in terms of what they're doing, so we understand that this is challenging, but then you have to think about, did we have the correct diagnostic information? Was this useful? So I think let's continue this conversation, because I'll continue to go to conferences and try to collect information. Our depth survey, we're trying to collect information about what people are doing, how they're doing it for reporting, because we know those NCBOs are challenging. But that's the first I've heard of reporting it after the fact, and it's really not what has been intended. For example, what would you report on the one that's coming at, that's a census date report? You don't know yet how much time the student's going to take if you're reporting afterwards. So I don't know if, how would you report to us? And you need to report that the student's enrolled in something. So I think unfortunately, the way our reporting is set up, reporting after the fact isn't really successful in terms of the NCBOs. But I'm open to sort of talking it through with you and seeing if we can think about it. Okay. Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to get my head around.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is, even if you say it's 8 hours and they finished in 6,
right,
you can still turn it in for 8? Is that what you're saying?
Well, here's the challenging part, because it's not about the amount of time. Just like you'll have a course, and some students will do homework for 3 hours a night, and some students maybe will do 10 minutes a week. And we still give the student credit for completing that course when they complete that course, because if they've mastered the material. And that's how we've tried to think about this, but we just want to be a little bit careful so we don't think about it in a way where students really are able to go through and master things that maybe they already knew. And that's part of where the diagnostic comes in, and thinking about really what does this student need. And I know a lot of places think about building it. So maybe you build models where the student are assigned a 1 SCH intervention, and then when they get through that, you put them in the next 1 SCH intervention with the next set of material. So rather than saying, oh, this student really seems to need all the material in the class, and you put them in and they're done real fast, you put them in one block, 1 SCH or a half an SCH block at a time. When they're done with that module, you'll know they've mastered it. That's another way to think about doing it. So there's different ways to go about it, but it's, I think, better to think about it as structuring it beforehand, just because of how our reporting works. But we are looking at that data. There is a course start date and end date in the S, and that is, that does provide us some assistance in terms of understanding that. But usually that's set up at the beginning also. Okay, I do want to mention that you only have to report non-course based options on the S and the 1 and 4 and the OE1 if you are putting in for funding. Institutions can report non-course based options on the CBM002. It's items 23, 43, and 63. If they're not putting in for funding, state funding for those, and then you don't have to report them on all of the other reports. But we want to know you're doing them, and it's in our rules that institutions need to be offering these non-course based options for students. So there is a way to report that on the 2, and I'll mention that when I get to the 2. Okay. Okay, here's something that we've had a lot of questions about, and I want to make sure everyone's aware of this. If you have a student who, if you're structuring your non-course based options as something that happens before the semester starts. So say you test all your students and you find, all right, here's a group of 50 students that were really close to meeting the TSI standard, but they didn't quite get there. You can go ahead and have an intervention for those students before school starts. Maybe a week. We've talked about up to a week or 2. I've had people say, can we do 2.5? If you're going to have something, especially if they're incoming students before the school starts in the fall semester, you can report those interventions in the fall semester to us. You don't have to report them in the summer, because often those students aren't even enrolled in the summer, and you'd have to enroll them, and it gets really complicated. So we have told institutions that you can go ahead, stretch that at the beginning of the semester by a week or 2, so that if you are bringing students in who tested not ready, to get them into some kind of intensive boot camp, bridge program, whatever it is, to try to get them ready so they can start right in that first college level, course, then you can report that to us in the fall, in this example. And if the student came in and tested not ready, on the 2, you tell us they came in not ready, and then they met by the end of semester. So you will get credit for getting that student ready. And that's important for community colleges for success points. So we'll know they tested not ready, and then again, it was because of your intervention, because we're seeing a whole new world out there in terms of DE and what's working and what people are doing, and that's, I think, becoming more common. Yes?
I just had a question. If we're reporting those refresher courses 3 weeks prior to the semester starting and including those on our reports, has the state thought about extending the number of weeks out? Maybe further out instead of the 3 weeks, maybe 4 or 5 weeks out?
I think it really gets, then you're offering a summer course. You really are offering something in the summer if it's not just, a little bit before school starts. We just had a problem with schools not wanting to do those programs for incoming fall students, and finding it a real challenge to enroll them for the summer in those. So I think it's stretching it to go beyond 2 weeks, to be perfectly honest. And I don't want to give permission for any more than 3. Yes?
Now, is that limited to the CBM-S? Say if it's reported in the CBM-2.
This would be reporting the student for everything, on all the reports, as a fall student who was taking an intervention. So on the 2, they'd be coming in, they would be showing up on the 1 as a fall student. You wouldn't have them showing up as a summer student. You'd just be reporting them on the 1 with their DE hours, and you'd be reporting them on the 2 that they came in not ready, and here's what they scored on the TSIA assessment. And then, if they did get ready as a result of that intervention, then that they got ready during the semester. I hope this is following. So basically, you're just treating those interventions that happen right before your traditional start date as part of your semester and not as something that happened in the summer before. So that's what it is. So just for all the reports, consider it this is something happening during the semester.
So if that intervention happened prior to that 3 weeks out, not a core, it's just an intervention, we wouldn't report it for that fall.
You may. Yes, you don't have to. And 3 weeks is pushing it. I guess I've told people 3 weeks, but no more than that. But it's definitely, we're trying to make it easier for you because a lot of the research has shown that has been helpful to have those, get students in before the semester starts, get them through their DE, especially those bubble students who are close to meeting. So as people do that, we're trying to make it easier on the reporting side for all of you. Okay. Flex entry. All right. I did want to say I think people do pretty well with flex entry reporting. We've had to use it more and more as we've gotten all these non-traditional activities going on. We've got block scheduling, we've got compressed courses, we have so many different things going on, and thank you for your efforts to understand flex entry and to use it to report those students in courses that start after census dates or courses that span multiple semesters. As I mentioned before, there's a flex entry table. We'll try to add something about reporting on the 8 related to flex entry. And it's always important to remember, and this is on that table, that if someone starts a course in the middle of, for example, in October, but they finish by the end of the semester, you can report it on the S for that semester. On the end of semester reports for that semester, it's just going to show up on the 1 and the 4 as flex in the next semester. So we provide that information in the flex entry table. Okay, and then I just have the course. We have course begin and end dates, and just to make sure people use those. I know they were helpful in some research some folks were doing on developmental education to get a sense for who's doing some of those shorter compressed DE interventions and courses versus the interventions and courses that last the full semester. So please be sure to get the dates captured. It's also helpful to us if you are doing compressed courses. For example, I know there's a community college that is doing a lot of 8-week courses. That's a way for us to know and to be able to understand that that's happening. So please be sure to get those dates. Okay. So any questions on the S before we move to the OE1? Janet, did you have anything to add? Or you're good? Okay. Thank you.
Okay, the Community College Student End of Semester Report, CBM01. It's very similar, almost exactly like the CBM001. Again, it reflects all students enrolled at the reporting institution as of the final day of the semester, unlike the CBM001, which is the census date. Student demographic data is collected again. Now, there are 3 extra reports on this. As you saw in the little picture, everything kind of matches. So on the OE1, it'll look for CBM00S records not included on the OE1. E1 records not included on the S by semester credit hours and contact hours. And also the E1 records not included on the S. So whereas on the 1 and the 4, we would have 100 or 50 or 100 semester credit hour allowance. On this one, since everything is reported by student, pretty much it'll show that this student was reported with 6 hours, 6 semester credit hours on the E1 and 9 on the S. So that points you really directly to where the mismatch is at on the reports. It's an end of semester report, and the semester credit hours and contact hours reported must match on the OOS again with those 3 reports. University student end of semester report, again, it's going to be like the university CBM01. Again, reflects students at the reporting institution as of the final day of the semester. Demographic information, same. Again, S records not included on the E1. E1 not included in the S, only by SCH since there's no contact hours reported on the university reports. And E's not included in the S. Again, it's an end of semester report. And again, this SCH must match the SCH on the S. Are there any questions about the E1? Good. So we can go back to Paul.
Since Paul's here, why don't we, we'll pick up the 2 after, since Paul came down to help us with the 8 for the CTCs, we'll move to him next.
Sorry for my absence. Oh, the trigger again. Okay, so like we promised earlier, we'll do a separate piece for the community college, which does have a couple of nuances that are different. Again, it reflects employees of the institution who are paid a salary or received benefits associated with the institution who have any type of faculty appointment, regardless of the source of funds or their assignment during the year. Faculty demographic data is collected. Salary and appointment percentages are collected. Again, this is a semester report, but as you said earlier, only fall and spring. That is a difference from the universities, of course, that have a summer 8 report. The information is used in the accountability system, and not so much for any HRI reports, though. My mistake there. So this is a similar looking slide. We do the same thing for the budgeted average faculty salaries report. We double it. We convert it to a full-time equivalent, but we do it a little differently. We don't just divide it by the percent of time. In this case, for this report, we're only looking at full-time, 100% teaching faculty. So we've got a much smaller or much, I guess, tighter restriction on who's included in this report. And so in order to convert it, we basically convert everybody to a 9-month contract. So you report to us the contract length, and if, for example, you give us a 10.1 month contract length, we'll take the salary you report in the fall, we'll double it, then we'll multiply it by 9 and divide it by 10.1, and that would be your FTE salary. That can get a little confusing if you're trying to map what I'm putting on the report back to what you gave us in the first place. And again, these faculty salaries show up on the faculty salary page. Not used for the general academic study, but definitely used in the accountability system where appropriate. And so the duplication issue is exactly the same, except values 1 through 23 are identical. and it has the same impact. If you don't get these identical, then you start to duplicate faculty counts and FTE summaries, and that'll cause issues. So pretty easily identified. You just have to check to make sure those fields are identical for every faculty member. The last issue we have is the contract length issue. And I've got to say, on the community college side, it seems to be a little trickier. We especially get people who report the contract length for the semester instead of the contract length for the whole year. And it is a bit confusing if you have a faculty member that you're only hiring for the fall. We'll see a 4.5-month contract length on there, when actually what we expect you to report is the annual equivalent of it. So you're giving us the fall salary, but you're giving us the full year faculty contract. And that is just a little weird if you're only hiring the person for the one semester. It doesn't happen too often, but when it does, it often throws the report out of range. And you'll get that wonderful email from me or from somebody else here at the coordinating board saying, hey, something doesn't look right. And I think what I did was just talk through this next slide right there, because I deal with the issue so often. It's not hard to remember. Okay, and I've gone past my scope. Does anybody have any good questions? Oh, we do. We have several good questions. They're coming with a microphone. I was just upstairs listening, and it's awfully strange when you don't have a microphone and you're asking a question.
I have a question. On the edit summary, I get a list of instructors and classes that are not supposed to be on that report. Either they were already reported for the past term or should be reported for the next term, and they're under classes taught by non-reported faculty. How does that list get produced, and is there any modifications to get it taken off?
So this is the 4-8 problem, right? The match problem. And I think it's in years past when the 8 was a census date report, as well as the CBM004, and this is mostly for community colleges. We actually threw a hard error if your 4 and your 8 did not match. So when the 8 went to a end of semester report, there was talk about taking that match out, because what it would it really only comes about if the faculty that was teaching the class in the prior semester, so the 4 would be reported census date in fall, but is that right? No, the 4 would be reported in the spring. If this was a fall report, the flex entry, the course will be flex entry. The course would be reported in the spring semester, but the 8 would not be reported. But the 8 would be reported for the faculty in the prior semester in the fall, because it was end of semester. Then that faculty member did not teach a course in the spring. Therefore, you've got this 4 record out there with no matching faculty. We knew that would happen. We talked about leaving that report out, but every semester we find problems between the 4 and the 8. So we really need to leave that. We do ask that you just say these were flex entry courses that were, reported in the spring from the fall semester, and the faculty members did not teach class in the spring, therefore they could not match. I'm not sure how we would get around that. We can talk about it and look at it some more, but I think the mindset is still there because it happened for so many years that that 4 and the 8 couldn't have a mismatch, and everybody wants those to match, and it really doesn't have to be that way right now. We backed off of that.
Good. I did want to mention, I pulled up the flex entry table, the reference that we provide, and we did include some examples for how to report the flex on the CBM CBM008. So that is in that table. We've had a couple questions come in from the field about flex entry and wanting more detail. And in the interest of time, when we conclude the presentations, I'll be happy to stay. And apparently we have the broadcast till 5, so I'll do an explanation for those who stay on at home, maybe in a little bit more detail about flex entry, and we can put the chart up, because I know it does get confusing, and we've had more and more flex entry type courses happening. Okay.